Hey, welcome to 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. We're a father-son leadership podcast where we talk with lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems. And I tell you what, folks, this is going to be a great show because whenever you can't get out of the green room, that door is jammed shut because you just can't stop the conversation. I literally had to call timeout in the green room so that we could hit the record button. It is going to be a fun show, right, Kim?
Oh yeah, it's good. That's a very good problem to have. We talk about solving big problems. That's a pretty big one, but we solved it. I hit the record button. We're all set here.
Awesome. Yeah. And speaking of that, the big problems, the energy that just exploded in the room is our good friend Chris Beall. How you doing, Chris?
Oh, never better, Otis, Cam. Love to be here.
Yeah, this is great, and folks, the stories just hold on because they will start to flow. My first thought, Chris, in looking at some bio and just some things we talked about, is how did you are what I would call my personal experience a dichotomy or an oxymoron. I think it's more of an oxymoron than a dichotomy. You're in that IT world, but you like people and sales and that sort of stuff. How did those two things kind of coming in together?
I think it's because I was raised lonely. So, I grew up out in the desert and there were no people around. There's just like animals and books. I see all those books behind you.
Yeah.
The house was full of books because my dad was on a lifetime program I didn't know about until the day after he died, which was to read and annotate all of the best that have been thought and written in human history.
Oh,
And
wow.
so my house was a library that I grew up in, unawares, right? Because I'm just a dumb kid. And it was full of the best that have been thought and written in human history. And I didn't have anything to do other than talk to animals, which didn't talk back much, and read books. And I think that's actually the clue in there somewhere to the dichotomy, because I got really interested really early in how things work when people are at the core of making things work. But I was always interested in how things work, which is how I ended up in the physics world. I hate to admit it, but a physicist, mathematician by background. And
Yeah, you're just all over the map, aren't you? I mean,
yeah, I don't even know. I'm probably in the back of the map somewhere where they put the label blue. So that's kind of it. And I ended up in the software world because physics wouldn't have me unless I got a PhD, which sounded horrible. And I just finished my career as a professional blackjack player. So that would have been a real come down. So I went and got a job at this company called NCR because they were down the street and they were advertising for semi-smart people. And the way I got the job is you took a test. This is weird. You took a test, right? Like an IQ test kind of test. Ships and destinations, all sorts of weird stuff. Went on for about 2 hours. And I looked around the room, 32 people in there, and I said, I'm not going to get this job because these people are all experienced at the software thing. And I'm only a pretty good programmer, but I haven't programmed for years. I'd started in 68, kind of gave it up by then at some point. So I decided to interview the three fastest people to come out. So I finished the test fast, got it in, went out, stood in the lobby, interviewed the first three people out, figuring they were the three most dangerous, found out everything about them, went into the boss, told him, you're not going to hire me because these people are more experienced. It'd be the biggest mistake in your career. And I think you got to hire me. I'll work for you for free for 6 months. And he said, I can't do that. And I said, well, there's a telephone. I bet it hooks up to HR. You can find out what the low number is. And he offered me $14,300 a year to come and be the tech guy for this thing NCR was doing called the iZone. And whoop, legs in the bear trap, still in the bear trap, 44 years later, I can't get the damn leg out of the bear trap.
With that, talking about being all over the map and, having those different areas of interest, how did you kind of direct your energy in that direction and, make sure that you're pushing in one solid direction, in that bear trap rather than, just going and pursuing every little thing and trying to figure out all of these different problems? What kept you in that area?
I think it's a physics thing. When you get educated in physics, you keep learning the same thing over and over, which is whatever you think's going on, something's going on underneath that. And so instead of learning the surface thing like you do in engineering, you have to keep digging for the deep thing, right? Because they keep giving you these problems that are really weird. Like, say there's a raindrop falling through a mist of density rho. And what's the acceleration of the raindrop as it accumulates water out of the mist? Well, that's a weird ass question, right? But you can't answer it with some formula somebody gave you. You got to dig deep and say, well, what's really going on, right? So I think the physics education gave me the inclination, probably on top of some personal problems that I had, that, instead of accepting that things are as somebody says they are, I had an inclination to go, I'll call it deep, under the covers and figure out what was really going on. And that's what kept me going, because I love customer problems, because I can't think up my own. And I was given customer problems in a 10-state area. They had a lot of problems. But I would never just go solve their problem. I'd always think, well, what's underneath that? Now, in fact, I just wrote a 2-page memo to my chief technology officer today about a problem I ran into in a test drive I did with my wife's company yesterday, that was kind of blown off by engineering, like, oh, it's not a big deal, we fixed it, right? But looking underneath the problem, you find not just a design flaw, but some deeply flawed thinking about certain classes of problems that show up and how you might think about them and do something different. And I came up with a little recommendation. Let's make a top 10 really little stuff list, just little stuff that you don't care about, customers talk about, and then let's assign somebody to it to run it to ground. So that kind of thinking, which is never accept what's on the surface, always go underneath, that's been my North Star forever.
Were you a tinkerer as a kid? I mean, I'm imagining, I can remember, growing up, I was the kid who took apart the clock radio or
Yeah.
did all that and thinking like I'm going to do something different, and then put it back together. And of course it didn't work because I pulled something out or whatever.
Because you did something different.
Yeah. I mean, were you that kind of a kid too, where you dove in under the surface, not just in the academics, but the physical nature of it?
Yeah, I mean, growing up where I did, for one thing, there was a lot of physical stuff to do, right? And we had 6 horses and 2 goats and 16 dogs and 5 cats, and my job was taking care of a bunch of cattle and sheep and God knows what, So there's always like something to do. There's, like, you can do it by rote or you can try to understand it. And I have a habit of trying, but I never took the animals apart. Now, my sister Teresa took a dog apart by our pool once. And I could tell you that story, but it was kind of alarming because, well, it was a dog. But and then she boiled it in the backyard. Thank God it was in the backyard. Imagine what it smelled like if you boiled a dog in the house.
Can't be good.
All you dog lovers, hey, this dog was already committed to science and was a done deal. So, yeah, I took things apart. I had 2 friends. One in particular is very, very close to. He became the top guy at Sun Microsystems in building their chips, and architecting their chips. He's like a superstar in that world. And we would do crazy stuff. We'd buy, Navy, salvage oscilloscopes and rewire them so that they would work on regular stuff, and then see what was going on in some bull snake's nervous system. I mean, we did crazy stuff. Yeah.
How did you shift that from the physical object to the people? I mean, you mentioned growing up alone. Was that part of the drive that is like, okay, I got to find people and I want to dissect people in the mental sense? I'm not talking about, what your sister did with the dog. I'm talking about,
That's especially when you boil them.
Yeah, a little bit more acceptable understanding of people.
Well, it seemed to me as I was reading all that history teaches you there's kind of 2 kinds of people in the world. There's people who are trying to get things for themselves and make other people do what they want them to do, and they get pretty famous sometimes and go around, Genghis Khan it up, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then there's the other people that get written about are people who dedicate their lives to helping other people because they have some sense of abundance or excess. Like, yeah, this is all pretty easy. What I'm doing for myself, that's not so hard. So maybe what's left over, I'm going to try to help others. And that was a clear bifurcation to me. That was like, there are really literally only 2 kinds of people that are written about in history books. There is no third kind of person. There's the kind who are trying to aggrandize everything for themselves. And they may have some, high talk about, oh, I'm doing this for the, I don't know, because our history is so wonderful or our people have these traditions or whatever, but it's really for themselves, right? We see a little of that happening today. And then there are these other interesting people, I'll call them like the Ben Franklins of the world, that when you dig into their life, you go, well, that's interesting because this guy didn't do very much for himself, but he did a lot for other people. So I think that just kind of got baked into me as like, which one of these kind of people you want to be, Genghis Khan or Ben Franklin? And I would rather be more like Ben Franklin. And I think that's what actually liberated me from caring about what people think about me. And I think I read an autobiography once, a posthumous autobiography. Okay. Now, what does that even mean?
How is that possible?
Right? Well, there is one out there, and the title is a really wonderful title. It's What Do You Care What Other People Think? And it's a posthumous autobiography of Richard Feynman, the greatest physicist in the 20th century. And he's the guy who figured out a whole bunch of stuff, worked on the Manhattan Project and did practical work there, like built the first big computer in the world that was made out of people and adding machines. But he designed it all so it would do the calculations that let you figure out if you smash this stuff together, will it blow up or just fizzle? And, I kind of looked at that autobiography when I ran into it and said, that's how I think. I very consciously don't care what other people think. And that's liberating because then you can just be nice to them. You can try to be helpful because you're not caring about whether they think about you one way or another. That's not the point. The point is, do they have problems? Are the problems interesting enough to help them with? Are they good people? Otherwise, I want to help them. I could be wrong, by the way. I could try to help bad people, but that's an error, not evil. And so it kind of lined me up in that direction. And then along with this predilection for going inside of problems, it's like I love other people's problems. I just love them. You give me somebody else's problem. My own problems bore me to tears. But other people's problems, I go, that's pretty interesting. I wonder what's underneath that.
How did you find a way to put those together? One great choice on the path there. I agree with you. Between Genghis Khan and Ben Franklin, I think we take the Ben Franklin route. But hey, each their own, of course. But with choosing those paths and then having that inclination to solve the problems underneath the things, how did you put that together into your career? Because I think a lot of people, this is something that we work with both of our programs at Tribe of Purpose. They can have an understanding of these things separately, but then it's about putting them together and making that that life plan, if you want to call it that. How did you find that path forward that connected those dots?
Well, I guarantee you, I've never had a life plan, so I'm not that guy. So.
How did you connect the dots as you went?
I'm pretty good at a sword fight in a dark room, so I go into lots of dark rooms. That's kind of my life plan. So, what happened was, I think, everybody has stories like this, and sometimes the stories are a little bit apocryphal, but I think this one's pretty much a pivot story. So my first wife had a miscarriage when we were living in Phoenix, and we were about to move up to Colorado, and where her parents are. And it was a bunch of things. It was a bloody mess on my parents' kitchen floor. I grew up with a lot of bloody messes, so that wasn't too bad. But I needed a job suddenly because at the time, there was no health insurance floating around for people like us. And these things cost money, so I needed a job literally that day because I was up against a compressed time schedule to move to Colorado. So the only job I could get in one day was door-to-door sales. Now, I'd never done sales of any kind. This is before my NCR career. This is like, early. So I took the job because it was the only job I could get. See, now I'm in the dark room and the sword fight starts, right? It's a hot dark room because 110 degrees out in Phoenix in August. So it's a sweaty dark room. And so I thought it over. I thought, well, I don't know what to do other than start knocking on doors. So I'm going to knock on a door and see what I say. So I knocked on a door and just listened to myself say what came out of my mouth naturally, which is, hi, I'm Chris Beall. I'm your new Fuller Brush man. You probably don't know what Fuller Brush is. I sure don't. And that moment flipped a switch in me about sales being part of helping people, which was really interesting because it had never occurred to me. My mother hated door-to-door salespeople. She would say no and thank you. She'd say thank you in a way that left a hole in your body. Boom. She'd slam the door, right? So I learned a lot from that. Mostly I learned don't be a door-to-door salesman. But here I was being a door-to-door salesman, people just like my mom had been. And I found myself trying to figure out, how can I use my desire to help them in order to make this job work? And it was that very difficult problem, which I think is the core problem of business. Like, how do I take my desire to help others, which is why my business exists, and use that in a way that causes money to flow from them to me, sufficient to cover my overhead and maybe even have a little left over, a profit thing, right? And I could, I don't know, grow the business or get better at something or whatever. So by saying those words, by being honest with this person, it forced me into a situation where I had to think up what to say next, because they were all great. They would all say, how can I help you? Every person said, how can I help you? Because I washed up on their doorstep, cheerful, but like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what this thing is. And I found myself saying, well, this would be really helpful to me. If I were to go and research our products, as I've heard, it's a rumor, I don't know if it's true, that we have some products that are really good around the house and not available in stores. So if I were to go research our products and I found one or two that I really think would change your life, can I come back and share those with you for 5 minutes? Everybody said yes. So then I just did it. I did the research, which was the work for them. So I went first. I learned in sales, in business, you're really smart to go first. I didn't know that. Give something before you ask for something. Don't do that give to get thing, just give. And I went and did the research. I'm a pretty good researcher. I mean, I'm trained to do research, right? If this isn't very hard, product research is a little easier than going into the physics lab and, I don't know, measuring the speed of light in a room that's 30 meters long with a little spinning mirror, which I've also done.
Right.
So I did the research. I found 2 products for each demographic. I had 7 demographics. I knocked on 237 doors over a 1-week period. I did the research over the weekend. I came back to those 237 doors. Not everybody answered, but everybody who did answer let me share the products. And one of my products you would buy from me unless you hated me. You really would. It was picked for that purpose, because I figured you're either in a relationship with someone where they're giving you money for value or you're not. So let's get in that relationship and then see where it goes. And you kind of get the theme here. I don't look very far down the road, but I'm pretty sure that I'm going to do okay if I move down the road, right, to into that next dark room. So I went into that dark room of actually selling, and suddenly I'm the #1 Fuller Brush man in Arizona, like literally overnight. Wow. Like 92% door to close ratio. So that set something off in me and said, oh, there is a way of interacting with people that is structured, purposeful, effective, and changes everything. Mm-hmm. Where you go from no commercial relationship to a helpful commercial relationship by respecting what they're like on the inside. And that's my business now. We help people have hundreds of thousands of millions of conversations with folks, right? I think we mediated 3.3 million business conversations last year. And what happens in them? Same thing. You've knocked on that door. You've ambushed somebody. Now what?
Well, I think it's great. And I'll throw it back to being the kid out on the ranch, in that there's a lot of authenticity when you're growing up around animals and dealing with animals and not in the city, lots of things going on. And I think that gives you that great foundation. The thing I would like to learn more on is this, how you got past the image of your mom slamming the door on the guy. She said, thank you. That now you're the dude on the other side of the threshold asking to make a sale.
Yeah, well, my whole life consisted mostly of getting past my mom's thoughts about me. My mom loved me, but she also would say nice things like, Chris, plenty of room out in that desert to bury a child. And if the coyotes didn't dig it up, I don't think anybody would ever know. I mean, my mom made it abundantly clear that the universe was about 4 degrees Kelvin, and it was not exactly working for you. You were going to have to make it away. And that was her gift, actually, to my feeling was her gift to me was she made it clear that you had to kind of take care of business yourself. and nobody was going to just do it for you. And I actually grew up rock climbing and mountaineering too, and very serious rock climbing and mountaineering, not kind of half-assed. So that's a world where you make small mistakes and you don't pay. You're not around to pay, right? You're done. So when you're doing that kind of stuff at the age of 16, doing 6-week expeditions, no adults, two kids, and doing first ascents on big walls and the big mountains in America back then, there was a place, the Wind River Range, which now has maps. Well, back then it just had these kind of maps. They had blue lines on them. The government put little blue lines on them and little numbers, but nothing else. And so when you went in there, you were on your own. And this is before cell phone. I don't know. Some people listening to this going, what? There was no time before cell phones. Well, Julius Caesar, they not only didn't have cell phones, they had to stab him to death with like styluses. They didn't even have proper knives. Oh, no, they did have them. They just didn't use them. So, that world was cold, right? But it was also warm because I was out there I learned about partnership. I learned about the risk mitigation that comes from working with somebody else in extreme circumstances. And then my mom's point was, well, all circumstances are extreme. There are no non-extreme circumstances. Pay attention, you boofus. So I think that combination, because I was off climbing with my climbing partner, Jim Haggard, doing serious climbing, big stuff, that nobody had done, walls nobody had done. And we were doing them in the mountains where if you fall and break an ankle, you're done. Yeah, like, what are you going to do? The other guy's going to walk out for 5 days and somehow you're going to be fine when somebody walks back in and hopefully finds you. It doesn't work out. So I learned that other lesson, and I still apply it today, which is like, I much prefer being married to being single. Why? Because partnership allows two people to cover each other's weaknesses while working towards common goals that they happen to have overlap with their own goals to some degree, right? And that's that covering up of weaknesses, because we've all got weaknesses. As a climber, I found mine really, really fast. I found them fast. I fell 800 feet once. That was both a wake-up call and a go-to-sleep call, because I went to sleep for a while after the 800-foot fall, and then I woke back up and had some work to do. So, that's kind of the rest of it. My mom, I never took her thing as my thing. That was her thing. She grew up how she grew up. She was, she was a lonely kid who, her sister was 17 years older than her. Her dad wanted a boy. She was given a gun at the age of 5 and told to go shoot rats at the dump. Well, she shot her sister off the toilet, which is kind of a funny story. Mom, the gun's not loaded.
Ooh, gosh.
Boom. Yeah. Upstairs, bathroom, So, it wasn't an overcoming of that. I incorporated my mom's point of view pretty consciously once I survived that fall. That fall at 14 changed me. It liberated me completely. I was dead. And when you're dead, it's like pretty cool afterwards, because like, no, hey, it turns out I'm not. I was wrong, right? Because you go through a lot of things on a fall like that. You go through a lot of internal processes. It takes a long time. And when I came out of that, I realized, I'm not this little kid. I've survived this thing. And my mom and I had a very different relationship after that. Mm-hmm. So she was still advisory, and she still represented the coldness of the universe. It's going to kill you someday. But it allowed me to kind of just go, well, that's her and I'm me.
Oh, I love that. I'm
that's
really
a long answer. You guys ask the most unusual questions.
Hey, that's all right. Well, here's another one, because what that brings to mind, and I think you might have foreshadowed your answer to this question, talking about partnerships there. But your process of taking things one step at a time, going through and solving each of those problems. What it reminds me a lot of is something we've talked about on the show before, which is this idea of like a problem-solving fever. To give the quick background on it, because we haven't talked about it in a while, Dad, for people who haven't heard this part of the show. But going back to the idea of from Les Stroud and Survivor Man, he talked about bush fever being one of the deadliest things, because you go out in the woods and you get separated from your campsite, and then instead of just being calm, analyzing your situation, you keep telling yourself, oh, it's over that next hill. It's over that next hill. And you keep going and going and going. We talk about chasing ghosts in Wyoming. We go hunting pronghorn dad. They're always over that next hill, always over that next hill. Entrepreneurs, we came up with this term of problem solving fever for entrepreneurs who just keep seeing that next problem and then go, okay, I could solve that next problem. And they never really stop to see, should I be solving that problem? Is that the best problem to solve? They kind of just keep going from fire to fire. What was your process for keeping yourself on track, not running from fire to fire? Was it a partnership, somebody keeping you literally on track, making sure you're working on the right things, or what?
Well, at first it was, I had a job and I had these customers and they had problems and I didn't know anything. So my problem was I had to be the person who knew something when I didn't know anything, right? So I was in a mode of learning. It's like being the teacher, reading the book ahead of the class, right? And that was, that keeps you pretty highly directed. It's like, oh, well, this person at the school, at the big school district in the Navajo Nation needs to do a sysgen on our machine, and all we have is a telephone. How am I going to talk them through that when their culture doesn't support proactive speaking on a telephone unless they're answering a direct question? So it's getting down at that level. Like, how does this thing that I'm doing really work? Not what's over the next hill, but how does this work? And then can I learn from it? And I look at life this way, and I don't know when I came up with this, but I look at it like this. You're either in flow, which is rare and delightful and tempting to go forever, even though you can sometimes be in flow doing something totally ridiculous, right? Or you're stuck. And that means you have to learn something. You're stuck because you don't know what to do. If you don't know, you got to learn. So you got to learn either what to do or how to do it. And then the third state is waiting, which is the hard one. Well, I was lucky. I learned how to wait because that's the key to climbing. Climbing is mostly waiting. Your partner, you're the belayer. Your partner's around the corner. The rope's going up there. The wind is blowing. The hail is falling. You're cold. You're sitting there for an hour and a half, and you can't even talk to them because they're out of voice. Well, you learn how to just wait, right? And waiting is a massive skill that is not much taught, and it's hard to find circumstances to teach it. Flow is easy. Any idiot can stay in flow. We all stay in flow. We're doing something we like. It tempts us. We just keep going, right? Recognizing when you're stuck turned out for me to be the big deal. It's like, always be ready to admit I might be stuck. It's time to learn. And again, I'm the guy who doesn't look very far into the future. So it's like, learn something about what's going on now to solve a problem that's right here and now. But also think, okay, if I do this, does it change anything? That is, does the world change? Do I get a new place to stand, so to speak? It's like when you're climbing, when you finish a pitch or you make a move or you do anything, you're in a new place. You're always in a new place. One little move, you go left hand off the hole, put the right hand on, and your weight moves over to the left. You're in a new place. Somebody who's watching won't even know that, but you're in a new place. There are things you can do from there that you couldn't do before, and there are things you could try to do from there that will kill you. And that's what the whole game is about. It's a very slow game about being in a new place and figuring out what to do with that, right? So, that's kind of been the core for me, is always like, don't chase anything. Always ask yourself, where am I? Am I stuck or not? And I think some entrepreneurs get into flow chasing problems. Yeah. And that's a bad place to be, because you're taking a stuck behavior, which is go learn something, and you're using it for self-gratification, which doesn't, it's not legitimate with regard to outcome. You can't actually say, and if that worked, I'd be in a new place. It's just like, you like the feel of moving through problem spaces. It's Feynman actually wrote a book on this topic. And Feynman's books are amazing because his voice is amazing. He's one of the most amazing people ever lived. He wrote a book called The Pleasure of Finding Things Out. And that was his world. He would like to go to that next thing. The pleasure of finding things out. It's pleasurable. It's fun. It's like, solving puzzles. But you got to have the discipline to ask yourself the question, am I doing this because I'm stuck? And am I doing it because it feels good? If it feels good, it's probably the wrong thing to do.
It reminds me of, I was just going to say, like, thinking about like the functionality of depth, that it's like when it comes to like a depth of knowledge, that you reach this point, this very shallow understanding where it's just fun. And then you get past that where it starts to get to hard work and you start to dig more and more and you start challenging some of the things you understand. You get to that more complicated level of understanding. But like you're saying, Chris, that takes work. So people just want to self-gratify themselves with each problem. They just go shallow, each problem, shallow to shallow to shallow. Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, and it takes work. I mean, Edison, who was it? No, Ford. Henry Ford said, thinking is the hardest work of all. That's why hardly anybody ever does it, which I think is pretty profound. Thinking is really hard work. We had a situation this weekend where my wife and I were working with my data set, my top data guy and my head of customer success on making lists for her company's test drive. Now, they didn't have any lists, but they had a notion of some titles. And as we worked through it, we realized there were no titles that properly aligned with who they needed to talk to. And so, but we wrestled with the problem, and we actually got down and made a primitive model where she would query in a very simple way, LinkedIn Sales Navigator, find people who looked pretty good, and then extract them from those queries about 10 to 20 at a time using a piece of technology that could scrape them out of the screen. Now, you can't get to 20,000 that way, but you can get an understanding of what's working and what's not. But I still couldn't figure out, like, how do you get to 20,000? So I went to sleep on Sunday night, woke up Monday morning, and I realized, there's this database that we have over here that has everybody's work histories in it, 40 million people. Let's ignore their titles and just look at their job histories and make the list that way. Now, that was one of those things that I wouldn't have gotten there without the 3 days of previous work. And people would laugh at us. It's like, really? You successful business people, you think of a high level, blah, blah, blah. You're sitting there grinding away with your fingers and your eyes and your brains on something that you might not get anywhere, but you're going to learn something. But they wouldn't recognize that. People think we're like the nerdiest creatures on earth, right? I mean, we watch our podcasts for evening entertainment. Look at that. Yeah, I did that wrong. So, that kind of thing where you're willing to do the work, not knowing you're going to get the breakthrough answer, but knowing for sure you're not going to get a breakthrough answer unless you do the work. And the work involves often using your hands. We think with our bodies. We don't just think with our brains. I mean, you put somebody in a sensory deprivation tank, what do they think? They think they're insane after about 15 minutes because they've gotten unmoored. They're no longer connected to their senses, and they're no longer connected to their bodies, to moving. That's why a guy like Stephen Hawking is so flippin' amazing, right? How do you sit inside of a body that can't move and think great things? That's one of the greatest accomplishments in human history. Now, he did have the ability to manipulate stuff in a very difficult way, and that probably helped, actually. It seems like it's a bad thing. It's probably a good thing, because at least it was hard.
Yeah.
Things that are physically hard, I think, keep us grounded and allow us to stay in a problem and let our thinking actually keep moving forward, because we don't just think with our brains. Nobody's ever found a brain sitting over on a shelf and go, what do you think? And had an answer, right? It always comes with a body and it moves, and we're we are animals in the world doing what we're doing. So I don't know if that's the answer anybody thinks is sane or not, but that's kind of how I look at it. Is you got to do the work. And the higher level you think you are, other people think you are in the world of business, the more important it is for you to go in yourself and do the work to make sure that you're evolving your understanding of the problems and the possible solutions, not just relying on somebody else, because they might not have worked hard enough. That's where the Edisons and the Fords and those people come in, is they were relentless at staying engaged. This is where Elon Musk stays engaged. He doesn't just go, hey guys, I have an idea. Let's build electric cars. It's like, hey guys, I'm sleeping on the floor and we're trying to figure out how to make sure that the yield on sticking that stupid bumper on there gets up above 98%. Otherwise, we're not going to make our number. Now let's go out on the factory floor and look at that. I'm sure he does smarter things than that, but they're those kinds of things.
Right.
And I am not a believer in the delegated manager who goes, oh, yeah, I got a plan. All y'all go do something. It's like, well, how do you know the plan makes any sense unless your body is somehow involved interacting with the cycles of hypothesis, experiment, assessment of results, and who do you have around to keep you honest and say, no, that wasn't that. You're just, because confirmation bias kills us every time. As Twain said, right? Mark Twain. It ain't what you don't know. It's what you know for certain that's wrong. It gets you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I agree with you. You know, I've always, my favorite phrase is, you know, for leadership is pick up a shovel and start digging, right? I mean, you can't just stand out and, you know, be the road guy, you know, on the side of the road. There's 4 people watching that one backhoe dig one hole. You can't do that and be successful. You got to get in there and start doing the work with it. Sorry for all our road work guys. It's a bad joke. We all know it's true. You're all doing something very important right then. But speaking of people,
I gotta tell you guys a story. Okay, yeah, I used to be a landscape laborer working on golf courses and working on road, and I did it in the summer in Arizona. I consider that job to be one of my top 3 jobs for learning about how to manage. And the number one thing I learned was this. We were the last non-union shop. It was huge thing going on called McCormick Ranch. Big, you know, lots of companies are in there working for this Canadian company. Got this wonderful Hungarian overseer. Chris, shovel you the concretes. That kind of thing. I know, you didn't understand. Shovel you the concretes, right? So we're doing this thing, and we're finally at part of the job where 22 people are working together to shave down the side of a wash by hand, Indian bend wash. We're doing it with shovels. We're doing it with rakes. We're doing it with mattocks. Just handwork. 22 of us. Shop goes union because they threatened to strike the entire place because of our little group of 22. 22 gets reduced to 7 because we're now being paid $5.12 an hour, which is so much money they can't afford the 22. So now we got 7 people. Which 7? 3 of us who came up together through Saguaro High School in Arizona, 3 of the top students there. All 3 of us in the top 10 in one of kind of an exalted class, won the national math contest, blah, blah, blah. And then 4 other guys. 3 took on leadership. The 7 outperformed the 22 in terms of linear feet per day. That's the number one management lesson I ever learned.
Wow. Yeah. It's not the quantity, it's the quality, right?
I missed that because
I said it's not the quantity, it's the quality of the people.
And what's funny about that one is the 22 contained the 7, right? So the 15 who looked like they were working were actually producing negative value. Even though you watch them and they're
that's moving. The real lesson there, Chris. They were producing negative value, not the value of the 7, but the ones who are producing the negative value. That's powerful.
Yeah. It just liberated us to do what we liked to do, which was to work hard, think together, enjoy the moment, and produce results.
Man, I love that lesson because it's so important for people to understand that. You know, it's, I don't know if Dave Ramsey coined this or who coined it. You probably know off the top of your head because you've read so many books, but it's slow to hire, fast to fire. And it's that aspect. When you see that guy that's causing the problem, quit beating around the bush and cut the cancer out. I mean, there's no other way of putting it.
There is no other way of putting it. And at hiring time, I believe you can actually detect those people in advance. And I've always done it this way, and it's not very nice and nobody likes it. And half the people say no. But by the time somebody gets to me in an interview, I just tell them, look, you're already qualified for the job or you wouldn't be talking to me. Nobody's going to put somebody in my office talking to them unless you're qualified. So now it comes down to, is it going to work out for you? It's going to work out for me no matter what, because I can fire you. So it's, my situation's a good situation. Your situation's a dangerous situation. because you're about to join up with something and you need to understand what it's like. So let me tell you what it's like. Here's how it works. Mental model. We're in a rowboat and we're going to row all the way across the Pacific Ocean because we've heard there's an island over there that's worth a lot. That's good stuff there. We don't have enough provisions to make it, I guarantee you. So we're going to have to catch some flying fish and do whatever. It's going to be chaotic on occasion. The boat's going to need to be bailed and things are going to break and all sorts of stuff's going to happen. So if you're the kind of person who likes to sit there and keep pulling on an oar when it's time to bail because, well, I'm an oar guy, don't join.
Yeah.
And if you don't like being wrong, don't join, because we're going to be wrong a lot. So our job is to be enthusiastically wrong every day. And if you don't like having everybody see what's wrong with you, don't join, because we come to work naked every day and we just make mistakes right in front of everybody. And it's because otherwise we can't learn fast enough to get across that damned ocean. And here's the test. Come to me once and say you want to go to a conference, take a course or whatever for yourself to improve yourself, your own career. I'll remind you of this conversation. Do it twice and I'll fire you.
Folks, if you want to learn how to hire somebody, use that right there. That is system. Awesome. And I've hired a lot of people in my day, but I've never heard it put that simply and that concise. That is a powerful way of putting it. And when I start to think about what I learned today, man, it's too long of a list, but I got to go back to when you're dead and you're not, things look a lot better. And that right there, there's a lot to be said for that. I don't recommend trying that physically, but the mental aspect of that, the reality of that is a very powerful thing. Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
I was going to say, is that the purest form of the pre-mortem? Is that the evolution there, that you pre-mortem your death so you don't have to actually fake die and then come back? We'll talk later on that. But no, for me, what I learned, I loved what you were saying, Chris, about, doing the work for the possibility of a breakthrough. Because I think that's so important when you think about stretching your mental muscles in any different way, whatever it is, learning those different pieces. And then maybe you'll put them to solve this problem. Maybe you'll use them to solve a problem 10 years from now. Maybe you'll never use it, but putting in that work to get better so you can use it if that opportunity presents itself.
Chris, how about you? What'd you learn?
I learned you guys ask the weirdest questions on earth, and I love it. Whatever it is you do to innocent people, it's got to be profound, because I think I just experienced it, and it's pretty special. What I learned is there's a way of investigating through questions and understanding that I really admire. You guys do it better than I've ever seen or heard. I've been part of it. I'm in, this doesn't feel like a sword fight in a dark room, but everything is. It's interesting, right? And there's the way of learning about somebody else by asking deep questions, but they're answerable questions. That's what I learned. I mean, you two are masters at this, and I don't know what you do for a living, but it's got to be pretty interesting.
It sure is.
It is. And thank you so much for that. Chris, how do folks find you and learn more about Connect and Sell and see what y'all got going on?
Yeah, we're all modern. We got this thing called a website, connectandsell.com. It's really cool. It's got information on it. Some of it's true, some of it's false. As my wife said, though, you want to learn about this thing, you got to push the button. You got to use it. Mm-hmm. And it's frightening, but it's available to almost any business if they want to try it. We call it an intensive test drive. You go fill out the little form, and whatever our rep says, just say, yeah, great, I'd love to do that test drive. And then it's a half day of full production use of the fastest thing in the world. And it's mind blowing. It's truly, truly mind blowing. We do 600 of them a year. And we do them without any regard for whether you're going to buy anything from us or not. And folks make sometimes no money, but sometimes they make millions of dollars that day. So it's like a little lottery ticket. I got a podcast called Market Dominance Guys that Corey Frank and I do. We just dropped episode 205, I don't know, yesterday or something like that. It's a cookbook for dominating markets using the human voice. You pave the market with trust, and then you harvest the trust over the 3 or 4 quarters it's going to take for folks to come into a buying cycle. Pretty simple. I just gave you the whole podcast, but go ahead, listen to it anyway. It's a lot of episodes to say 2 things. Say, I'm very inefficient. Um, and I'm out there on LinkedIn too. I'm reasonably active. I used to be quite a bit more active, but reach out to me on LinkedIn. I might not ignore you.
Awesome. Hey, Chris, man, it's been great having you on the show. I can tell you, I'll speak for Camden. Can't wait to have you back real soon because there's a lot more stories I want to get into.
I'd love to be on again. Folks, they should learn from us old people.
That's right. You hear that, Camden?
That's what I've been doing for 312 episodes.
There you go.
I love it.
That's the whole game plan here. I'm playing the long game.
All right, Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank y'all for listening to today's episode of 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. And a special thanks to our guest, Chris Beall, for joining us today. Remember, you can watch full episodes of the show on YouTube at 10X Your Team. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to pass along to other lifelong learners in your tribe so they can enjoy it too. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. As always, the full archive of episodes available at www.10xyourteam.net. Thanks again. We'll see y'all next time.